action, intention, action. Those two things are so linked and so part, dare I say, of the DNA of a workplace culture. Are the actions lining up with the intent? Or is the intent completely out of the realm of the actions that you are presenting to the organization? Because a lot can falter if there's a huge gap between those two things. Trust being a big part of it. And our guest today, we're going to dig in. Hold on, here we go. Hello, my name is Russell, and this is Relationships at Work, the employee experience and workplace culture podcast. Thanks for joining. Hope you're having just the most amazing day. And if it's not so amazing, tomorrow will be better. We can hope, can't we? Oh man, I'm starting with an optimistic angle, aren't I? But I am really happy that you joined us. I want to provide as much value as I can with this podcast, with my various platforms, Instagram, Facebook community, Twitter as well, if you follow me there. But I'm looking to launch very, very soon one more piece of content that you might find interesting. It's called Raw Notes. Raw, R, at W, Relationships at Work. See, I can be witty and charming every once in a while. It does happen. Anyway, just go to relationshipsatwork.ca, Canadian, and in the top right, you'll see Raw Notes right there, and then you can click on that and follow the instructions. You'll sign right up to a little bit of free insight week to week, providing, some experiences I've had, read, some things I think that you might find of interest. It'll be a little something extra for you to maybe help with mindset shifts or to just, bring something to your attention that I think might, be helpful. Speaking of helpful, Neal Dlin, he is our guest today. And when we discussed putting the topic of intention and action alignment, I was really curious where this conversation was going to go. And I was thrilled that he dove into things like curiosity and leadership and how those are integral to those intentions and actions really better aligning and really helping your culture be healthier. Because if those two do not line up, your employees are going to know, and it's going to hurt your culture. It really, really will. Neal's got some really great insight, and I can't wait for you to hear from him. So let's not wait any longer, shall we? I'm here, and through technology, over there is Neal Dlin, a fellow Canadian. Here is why he's awesome. He's the Chief Human Experience Officer for Choristry, an agency focused on the customer and employee experience. He's also a keynote speaker. I don't know if that's been mentioned, but I should mention it a few times. He does it quite often. He's been focusing on those humans for more than 25 years in various industries because, you know what? And we just talked about this before we got the podcast going. You can't improve the customer experience without looking at the employee one. Looking back at Neal's background, one of the things that my little 21-year-old self was like, he used to work at Lava Life. Okay, I remember Lava Life. It was my first online dating profile. We don't need to go into that, but Neal, my little 21-year-old self was like, I remember that. And fun fact, both Neal and I used to be on ICMI's International Customer Management Institute's top thought leaders of blah, blah, blah list. He's still on the list. I was on 2020 and 2021. So I am not cool as Neal anymore, but it was a cool honor to share such a list with you. Hi, Neal.
Hey, Russell. How are you? Well, I think I need to hire you to do my intros at every single engagement I'm ever part of for the rest of my life.
What? Here comes Neal. What? And I'm doing this at 6 a.m, so not so bad.
Amazing.
Also, I love the fact that you were a founder and artistic producer of Unsung Heroes Productions, which is a theater group that's main purpose is basically to raise money for great causes. That did my giving heart good. That's anything you want to mention about that before we get into the employee experience side of it?
Yeah, Unsung Heroes is something I started in my late mother's honor. It's musical fundraiser shows with folks like us who have other day jobs, and they come out, they perform, they're incredibly talented. and we raise money for cancer, mental health, poverty, and our current show this year is for Alzheimer's. I'm very excited about that.
Very cool. Very, very cool. Question I start with every single one of my episodes of Relationships at Work, which is, Neal, what's your best or worst employee experience?
I think my best experience, I mean, there's really two, but I'll kind of bring them together really easily. One was when I worked at a company called now called Loyalty One, which runs the Air Miles program here in Canada, Canada's largest loyalty program. And then the other one was launching Sonnet Insurance, which was Canada's first digital direct car and home insurance company. And the truth is, the reason why both of those experiences were incredible was because the person I worked for was a enabler, not a boss. You know, they were someone who let people who had certain skills run free in a way. I mean, pretty much. They were cheerleaders, they were mentors, they were block and tacklers. You know, they hired talent. And I always say this, you know, if you hire great talent and all of a sudden you then put a bunch of restrictions on their capabilities, you know, what's the point? And I think I learned that from both of these great bosses, and I'm going to name drop them because I just think so highly of them. One of them is Peter Van Heswick, who's now the CEO of CAA Niagara, and the other one is Carolyn Beatty, who's at Sonnet Economical Insurance still. Both of them incredible.
Anything you can remember specifically?
Sure. You know what? One of them, I'll give you an example that is really timely, I think. And it was at Air Miles, and I was young, didn't even know at the time that I had ADD, which I've now, you know, medicated for. But at the time I wasn't aware, and I was quite young to be in the position I was in. I think I was probably in my early 20s. And I was leading the email and online service channels at the time. And I wasn't like a traditional, you know, employee. I kind of was a bit, still am, I guess always will be rough around the edges. And I remember my boss said to me, Peter said to me, you know, you're, because I think I said to him even, I said, you know, I'm not always the guy that's going to be here at 9 a.m. Or 8 a.m. or whatever the time is. I'm the guy that will get everything you need done and more in less hours than others, not because I'm better, but because the ADD actually, unknowingly, that's how it works. But I'm going to get it done for you and more, you know. And he said, you know, Neal, none of that matters to me. You know, I look at you like a blue flame. You know, you're that bright flame, the center, you know, that burns brightest, but maybe not for as long. And so I leave it to you, you know, to set those things. If you're getting the work done and you're hitting the goals, everything else is in your purview. And if you look at it now, when we're in this great resignation, which sometimes gets misconstrued as, well, that's just because people want to work from home, which is just one thing, but it's more about people want control over their work life. They want the ability to balance the other things. They want the ability to work at their own pace and time. And by the way, not everyone. I mean, that's the other thing, is you have to know that everyone has different needs. But the point is he was very aware that, you know, if this guy is given that runway, he's going to do great things. And the truth is, we did great things. We had phenomenal results. If you have someone that's great and they work a little differently, why would you make them work the way other people do if they're giving you what you need? You know, it didn't make any sense. And so, yeah, that was a good lesson.
There's a lot of power of a leader that actually sees you for you, sees where your strengths, and leverages even things that others may see as weaknesses as something that, like, actually we can work together on this and do better through it. That's literally leadership, Neal, which I guess is
it. Crazy stuff.
So our topic today is about intent and action at work. Basically, if I'm not wrong, purpose and doing something about it. So isn't that kind of what we do when we go to work every day anyway? Here's your job, go do your job, then do your job. Isn't that intent and action, or what are we talking about here?
Intent and action is about understanding what drives people's behavior, and also understanding how your actions are perceived. and it takes a long time, I think, to become good at this. And it seems to be when I have conversations with any leaders, it just seems to keep coming up. People oftentimes, especially earlier, not just in their career, but before they really maybe even discover who they are, which for some of us takes most of our lives. We're not always aware that we might have good intentions, we might mean well, but how we're speaking, our body language, the actions that we take, how we go about, acting on our intentions, may be looked at from someone else as completely different than our intentions. And a lot of time at work is wasted actually on navigating that. And tensions build in meeting rooms and between colleagues and who are fighting. I've seen two executives almost at war with one another when both of them really just wanted to create a great customer experience. They obviously had different feelings about how to do it, but their intentions were the same. And if they could recognize that in each other and say, hey, look, I see that you are passionate about this. I see that you really care about the customer experience. I do too. Let's not fight about that. Let's just figure out what are some of the differences in how we want to approach this and try to find a way collaboratively to get there. But that's not usually what happens. Usually what happens is you see the offensive posturing, the defensive posturing, time is wasted, silos are built. It's insane how much time in organizations gets lost because of misinterpreted intentions. So on one hand, there's this an important skill of being really good detective at getting past words and emotions and body language and trying to understand where someone's really coming from. By the way, this is a skill that works for everything. It works for customer service. It works in our personal lives, but it certainly works at work. Really trying to be that detective and trying to understand what is happening for this person. What do they really want to accomplish here? And maybe I can start to identify that the reason they're coming across this way is not why I think it is, and their intentions are actually, good. And then on the flip side, knowing that most people aren't good at that. Most people don't have that skill set. They just don't. Even me who works so so much with people on it, it's so easy to fall into confirmation bias, subconscious bias, all these different things or just personally we can get triggered, right? That make it hard for us to keep that top of mind. So because people aren't good at that, we also have to be really good at being so mindful of how we are projecting, So if my intention is X, are my words and actions really plainly representing that intention? And if they're not, then I'm going to be sending people mixed messages. They're going to be creating potential tensions, wasting time. So this really, this happens in every aspect of life, but it definitely happens all day long in companies between coworkers, between employees and their bosses, and vice versa. So it's really important. It's a really important skill, both those skills, to manifest.
Do you think people show up at work? Truthfully, everybody's a little different. Obviously, we've already mentioned that everybody treats work differently. Everybody approaches work differently. So is there strength? I want to kind of divide it up here between intention and action, because I totally get how they're linked, but I don't think everybody shows up to work with intention. Some of them just show up to work just to do their job, check a clock, leave the door, hope it's a good experience. Well, you have other people that are quite a lot more driven and show up to work with, this is what I'm going to do. Here's where the intention of, I don't know, it feels like there's more of an engine in them when they go to work and they have that intent of changing the culture, reaching that goal.
Yeah.
What is the downside of not treating work intentionally?
I think, that's almost even like a different thing altogether. You're talking about how we set intentions.
Sure.
Which is a little bit different, right? Everyone shows up to work with an intention. Someone's intention might be to work as little as they can and get out of there, right? That could be someone's intention. Everyone has intentions, but I think what you're also talking about is those who really set an intention that's constructive and productive and positive. And that's a different thing altogether. And then that's a great exercise for all of us, right? I mean, there's all kinds of benefits to us sort of making a mindful point of setting intentions and then trying to put that into play. So I'm going to answer, I guess, your question in a funny way. So just by going back to the former, which is everybody has intentions, right? So, you just described someone coming to work who maybe isn't really focused on the best things for the company. They seem to just be, hoping to have a good experience and leave. But how do we know? Like, how do we know what their intentions are? And how do we really understand and get to what their intentions are? How do we get to what's driving it? Maybe their intentions are, maybe they are in a work environment where people who have their kinds of skills, and I can give you a million real examples of this, people who have their kinds of skills and approaches don't do well. I because I've spent a lot of time, in contact centers and helping people with that side of the customer experience. A lot of contact centers, you might actually you have great intentions of, wanting to do what's best for the customer and really, personally feel gratification from solving problems. You're naturally empathetic. You're a great communicator. But in many contact centers, those kinds of skills may not serve you well because you're being measured on how long your call is. Your calls are being listened to, and you have to use a certain script. You are not able to get off the queue and call a customer back, so you can't make that commitment when in your heart that's what your intention is. How does that manifest at work? Well, it might manifest as, you're trying to stay under the radar. So if you get back to the intention, when you see someone who is maybe not gung-ho and not energetic and not seemingly doing everything for the company, it could be, if you really understood their intentions, because their good intentions are largely not just are they not recognized, but they could put their job at risk. And so now you're impacting their engagement. So intentions are a funny thing. It isn't always to say that they're good. The idea that I was sort of, kind of honing in on is just being able to understand what they are. But I will say this, statistically, scientifically, psychologically, the vast majority of people's intentions are good. And we tend to forget that. And we tend to treat some people as if their intentions aren't good. And we tend to act and react as if their intentions aren't good. And that's some of the waste I was talking about. If you're not really good at understanding someone's intentions, then you're not reacting to what they really feel and want. You're reacting to what you see. And that's the wrong actions to take. So I don't know. That was a bit of a roundabout answer. I don't know if it answered your question.
No, it very much did. And that's sort of where I'm digging into a bit too, because it is not only the intent of how staff show up, it's also how leadership guides that intention. And they have their own, obviously, intention and agendas of so forth. So yeah. I like that you mentioned that constraints and traditional measurements can actually get in the way of possibly being productive.
For sure.
You can have all the best intention in the world, but if you don't have an environment of support, or if you're putting too much of a box on things, people may not be as, reach those actions of the intent that they are hoping to do. So you kind of touched on at the beginning, what is leadership's role? Is it just identification? But then once you identify it, how can you sort of, capture that intent and support your staff in reaching their goals? Because they come in, they want to do a good job, they're being intentional. Where's leadership in that?
Yeah, there's levels of leadership too, right? So if you're like a frontline leader, as an example, there's lots of things you are not in control of either. If you're looking at leadership as this beautiful and ambiguous body of all the folks that are, responsible for that employee experience, leadership's role is to look at the entire employee journey. It starts with, what is your company's purpose? What is your company's product? What is your company's brand? What are your values? What are your goals? I know this stuff sounds pretty obvious, but I can tell you that as I'm about to describe something, it rarely happens. It should, because I'm not saying anything that's not intuitive, but this rarely happens. So if you really have a great picture of that, then your first job is leadership. Well, your first job as leadership is to have a concrete picture of that, right? To really have a clear vision of what that looks like. Your second job as leadership, when it comes to employees, is to embed those things in the kind of ways in which you screen for the people you hire. And that doesn't happen very often. It happens in some great companies, but most companies, they'll have their purpose, their values, their goals, and then who they hire, they don't really seem to focus on any of that. Those things should be a beacon to attract talent, to attract like-minded people. You're never gonna change someone who's not like-minded. If your belief system, I'll give Dove as an example. Dove's belief, I'm going to mess up the wording, but Dove's belief is really about making women feel comfortable in their own skin. It's about social pressures, anxieties, about body issues and things like that. Not about selling flogging soap and creams. I mean, that might be how they end up doing it, but so if you're not someone that believes in that, or believes that that's a very real thing that people are dealing with, if you're not someone who really strongly has a feeling that should change, you're not likely ever going to be an incredible employee for that company. So how do you screen for those qualities in the beginning? And how do you prioritize those qualities over maybe some of the more technical qualities? So first leader's job is to set a clear picture of what's really important. Next leader's job is to really screen and hire people that are aligned to that over all the other qualifications. The next thing leader's job is to do is to provide great training and support tools that, again, align to that, and then great measurements that align to that, measuring the right things. And so often the measurements conflict with the goals of the company, which just blows my mind. Imagine the tension and friction that creates in the employee. Hey, this was so exciting. I was really looking forward to working for this company. I love what they stand for. Oh my God, the interviewer was amazing. They really dug in on how I feel about that. The training really supported that. Cool. Now I'm being measured, and I'm being measured against things that are actually preventing me from accomplishing that, right? So what are the right measures? What are we actually celebrating and recognizing? How do we actually include everybody in how the company, if you've got people who are aligned to that, and you look at them and say, oh, they're in this position, so we're not going to include them, or they're in that department, so they don't need to know. But I mean, you have to drop titles and hierarchies and levels, and remember that if you have somebody who's aligned to what your real purpose is, then tap them. It's not a commitment that you have to use 1,000 employees' ideas, particularly when they're in conflict. It's a commitment that you want those ideas. You want to hear them. You want to think about them and consider them and make them part of the solution. So how do you include them? How do you listen? How do you act on that? What do you cherish in your company? What do you celebrate? Like, going back to the contact center, if your value is to make women feel comfortable in their own skin, and you have a customer service agent who spent a long time on a call with someone who is really suffering, and maybe you even had to help refer them to, even, like, let's get extreme here, even psychological help, and you were sort of guiding them through that and giving them some resources. I mean, to me, you should be celebrated by the CEO in that moment, but in some operations, you might actually have your job in jeopardy. What are all the places as leadership that we create miscommunication, mixed signals, friction, effort, work, strain, and stress on employees? Because at the end of the day, the thing that people, if you go to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, things that people really want most is that high level of self-actualization, which is where we're really aligned. Our work allows us to act on our beliefs, and we have the ability to be creative in doing that. We're getting celebrated for doing that. We're feeling that great sense of accomplishment for doing that. What are all the ways in which leaders will actually, put the opposite, friction and tension and stress and confusion, until an employee is actually anxious and worried and concerned to act on those things that you hired them for? So long answer. Leadership has a lot of responsibilities. There's an entire employee journey. It has, lots of steps, but each step has to have continuity and connection back to purpose, and the filter is anything we're doing in conflict with, preventing with, obstructing, confusing, or is everything we're doing enabling, supporting, developing, recognizing those things? And if you can use that filter always and answer those questions, then as a leader, you're probably doing a pretty good job at honing and channeling that great intent from start to finish.
It's funny how, I mean, the topic of this podcast being intent and action, when a lot of people will think, well, oh, those are completely aligned. But as you so beautifully said, a lot of intent is never delivered in the action. Just because the words are on a poster in the office doesn't mean you actually are doing the actions that support those things. Case in point, if the intent of an organization is to deliver excellent customer service, but you have to be off a call center call in 3 minutes or less, that's not serving the customer, that's serving the process of the organization. So the intent is misaligned, or at least it's not showing up in action. So what are the ramifications of that? You mentioned anxiety. What happens when intent doesn't meet action?
Well, I'm going to actually first say to you that intent isn't always, the intention in that example you gave may not actually be the intention. Putting values on a wall doesn't mean the values are your intention. That could very much well be a situation where your intention was, we have to have a set of values, and your actual intention, if you become a detective, is that you don't even believe in those values, and that's why they sit on a wall and don't get acted on. That's a great example, right? Because there was action. The action was, we put them up on the wall, we put them in the onboarding package, they're on our website. Those are actions, but they don't actually mean the intention was that we believe in these things. Because if you believed in those things, other things would happen. So, the biggest ramification, in that particular example of a company who, isn't living to their values or their purpose, or says one thing and does another, is that strain. There's big ramifications on how that ultimately plays out with customers, the business, revenue, loss, all that kind of stuff. But the first stages are, as employees, it's incredibly stressful. Hey, I want you to drive to, point A on this thing, but you keep steering me off in this other direction. I'm never going to get there. That's really, psychologically difficult. And it's disheartening, particularly if you came to that organization based on those things. Look, we are in a time of the employee. And if any company doesn't get that, they're going to lose. The Great Resignation, by the way, wasn't pandemic driven. It started happening long before the pandemic. And like I said, the solution to that isn't just simply, okay, everyone can work from home. That's just one facet of what's happening. What's happening is employees are realizing that, and the pandemic maybe accelerated this, that they need to feel good about the work that they do. And so first that starts with, a company that has something that they believe in. But the second thing is that the work is rewarding, that they have relationships with people they like, that they have a boss who supports them, that they're challenged to be creative. So, when you say one thing and don't do it, it's just incredibly disheartening. And employees, thankfully are at a time where talent is hard to come by. They're not, here's what happened 10 years ago. 10 years ago, that employee would become apathetic, which is terrible. They would, you have presenteeism, which is like, it's not absenteeism. You're at work, but you're not really there. There's massive cost to it, because not only is absenteeism insurance costly, but it leads to mental health issues, which leads to use of benefits, which is very costly to organizations. So it's a massive cost and ramification of that. So that was 10 years ago. They would show up, they would, stick around, they needed to pay the bills, they didn't want to lose their job, but they certainly weren't doing a great job for you or your company. Today, they're just going to leave because they can get a job somewhere else. And more companies are going to be in tune to what they need and try to deliver an employee experience that aligns to, what they say they actually believe in and actually deliver on it. So massive ramifications. I know companies right now that are just struggling to fill roles, and it's hurting them. They can't execute projects. There are things that painful points for customers that they're taking a lot longer to resolve. Or even if you look at a band-aid to a pain point for a customer, which is customer support, is they shouldn't have to be that, but they often are. They're strapped for resources, and then you're waiting forever on hold to even get support for that other problem that they can't get around to fixing because they don't have talent in that side of the organization. So these are big ramifications, and today in particular, it means you're going to lose your talent.
So you mentioned being a good detective. So you get hired, you're in an organization. The intent is not aligning with the action here. And you say it's probably best to be a detective and dig into that. How do you go about doing that? And so you can make that understanding of alignment of whether you align with the intention of the organization you work for and better understanding it. How do you be a better detective, Neal?
And when I said that, what I was more referring to are like the micro moments, the micro interactions. I know someone recently that was telling me that they were struggling. They didn't know if they wanted to stay with their organization. They met with their boss. It's important to note the person that I was speaking with is a woman. Their boss is a man. And at one point, she started to get, upset. I don't think she was actually crying, but I think she was maybe getting close. And he says something to the effect of, I'm not going to say it right, but he said something to the effect of, my wife has really taught me that, sometimes, women just need to cry, which, we're at a time and place in 2022 where, that's an interesting thing to hear from someone because it could seem, sexist or biased or whatever the case may be. And I guess my conversation with her was, there's what you should and shouldn't say, and there's what you do and don't feel. And the question just becomes, he needs to obviously work on his self-awareness. How's he projecting? What are his intentions in that moment? What was his intentions throughout that whole conversation? What were some of the other clues earlier in the conversation and after that awkward moment? And everything that her and I talked about pointed to the fact that this guy, in earnest, really valued her, really wanted her to stay, thought the world of her, was trying in his way, which he needs to clearly work on, to make her feel like he's got her back. Now, his actions and his words trigger something totally different. It shows and it validates a bias that we know exists. And he very well may even have that bias. He may not have that bias. He may just be oblivious. Who knows? But the question is, again, what are his intentions? Is this someone you can work for? Is this someone you can't work for? Is this something that was terrible? Or was it ignorance? Ignorance versus bad intention. And so in that conversation, she actually felt quite strongly that he had amazing intentions. I said, well, maybe you can help him and coach him. Maybe you need to say back to him, hey, listen, I really feel like you do support me and that you're a great person to work for. I need to tell you that when you say things like this, how that lands for me, you may not be aware of how what you're saying, your actions are not reflecting your intentions. Your actions make it seem condescending or belittling or that you have a belief that women are weaker than men, or any one of these many things that action and those words could be interpreted as. And at the end, he might say, oh my God, that's not my belief at all. Like, this is literally what my wife told me, and I just thought it was the right thing to say, and I didn't think about all the consequences of that. So being a good detective, and by the way, I'm not condoning what he said, nor would I suggest anybody say things like that. But I just mean, it's never simple. And we are working in a time where we're in cancel culture, where phones come out and film everything, and we jump on those moments, and that's not a bad thing. There's a lot of change that needs to happen, and that's why we're doing that. But at the same time, we also have to be good at understanding where people are coming from, and trying to be understanding of where they're coming from, and putting ourselves in their shoes. I mean, this is really empathy 101, right? That's the detective work that you need to do to try to understand. And then in the end, you make your decision. You could say, hey, you know what? based on the intentions, I'm okay with this. Or you could say, I know the intentions, but the actions are still not okay. And I don't want to continue on like this. Either way, you have more information to make that decision, right?
So on the other side, and great story too, is an example of intent not meeting and action not sort of aligning. Say you're the person that has this intent, but their actions aren't aligning. How do you check in with yourself as a
Yeah.
leader, as a coworker, to know that your intention and action are aligning? Because if they're not, I mean, that's a lot where relationships can break, where trust can be broken, um,
Yeah.
where a culture can be poisoned when you see that intent not matching. So, what do you do internally, either as an organization or as an individual, to
Yeah.
go, am I checking in with myself? What do I need to do?
In some ways, it's a lot of the same skill, right? You really have to put yourself in the other person's shoes. If I was that person, knowing what I know about them, and hopefully you're pretty good at someone who can see the whole self and really understand the other person and where they're coming from, how might this land? If I was in their shoes and I heard this, how might this land for them? Am I really reflecting my intentions? That's one thing. Another thing is, and this is one of the hardest things, truthfully, let down your guard. So many times the reasons why our words and actions don't match our intentions is because somewhere between our intention and our action is a series of walls and defense mechanisms and filters that make us change what we're what we're really feeling and saying, because we think we know, and we want either what the other person wants to hear or how we want to project. Young leaders are this is a common issue with many young leaders, is especially because they may be suffering from imposter syndrome and think that there'll be an age bias or experience biases. They like to project greater strength, they like to project greater authority, and they like to hide weakness. And the truth is, those are surefire ways to misalign your intentions to your actions. If you can be honest, vulnerable, and authentic, you're rarely going to have that misalignment. And by the way, people will give you so much grace with honesty. So if you're even worried about it, like in that situation, if he had said, hey, I don't think what I said landed well, and I want to check in with you. Here's what I really meant to say. Is that what you took away, or what did you take away from it? A lot of people, when you're vulnerable and honest like that, people will give you such grace. And a lot of leaders will say, oh my God, then they're going to think I'm really weak and wobbly and, confused. And no, they're going to think that you are strong for opening up and for checking in. They're going to be so appreciative because you've just clarified something that they're going to be sitting with for 3 hours wondering what you really meant. They're going to be so appreciative that you trusted them enough to include them. And that's going to build trust in reverse, right? Trust begets trust. So, if you're a leader who's concerned about intentions and actions, the best thing you can do is A, really put yourself in the other person's shoes. What are they going to think and feel? B, feel free to check in with them and ask them, because that's okay. And C, always just try to be your authentic self and let go of the projections of what you think make you sound like a leader. A leader is someone who's authentic. So just stick with that. It will always serve you well.
So I'm going to ask you to put your consultancy hat on for a second, and you're going into an organization and you're seeing that the organization's culture's intent is not matching the actions to support employees to do their work. Where do you start?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many reasons that happens, right? It can just simply be that they don't have a really great framework to, operationalize those things. They don't have a way of really making it clear across the board to all leaders what they value and cherish and what's important, and they don't have it embedded into their culture. It could be sometimes a single toxic executive. It can be a single department that puts others on the defensive, and all of a sudden things go awry. A lot of the time when culture is mismatched to values, it's usually due to that either positively or negatively, they're just not being reinforced. Meaning, if you live those values, you might still be being discipline, put on performance management plans, being coached to for, something, that you did that was actually aligned to the values. Or on the flip side, and way more often what happens is other aspects of performance are recognized and celebrated despite the fact that someone doesn't live values. I mean, it's an old model. I think it was in what book was it now? Not Good to Great. Maybe it was I can't remember. There's a model that kind of has, if you have somebody who, it's a four quadrant model of someone who, it could even be the will skill model. My brain is really fuzzy right now, but it's really that model of, if you have an employee who, has all the right intentions, behaviors, values, desires, and not the right skill, versus someone that has a bit of both, versus someone that has all the right, skills, but doesn't have any of the values, which is the most dangerous in an organization. And oftentimes it ends up being, if your culture is this way, that one who has all the great skills and none of the values, because if you're not a company who can embed that framework into your organization, then you end up constantly celebrating that person. They hit the numbers, right? They, if it's a salesperson, they get the sales. If it's a, marketing person getting growth, whatever it is, they hit the numbers. And so they're getting celebrated. And the message that sends to everybody, especially if this is a person who's toxic, is this is what matters to this company. What matters is that end result ahead of how they got there. And the problem with that is you can get end results in the short term a whole bunch of ways, but sustainably that company is going to be in trouble if they don't really focus on how they got there. So that's, I kind of didn't really answer your question. The consultant answer is, obviously we'd have to assess it. We'd go through and do an assessment, and we have surveys and focus groups to try to get to the bottom of what is the root cause of this. Is it that they don't have the framework? Is it a toxic culture? Is it that they have a single, what is the reason? And we would assess every aspect of the journey and be able to help say, you've got these elements, but not these elements. You've got a great screening thing, but you're not really, living up to that in your KPIs. Or you've got great KPIs, but you're not really living up to that in how you do succession planning or whatever the case may be, right? So as a consultant, it would be coming in and doing an assessment. If you're doing this from scratch, it would be building out your employee experience framework and operationalizing it through every role. So that's the consultant answer. It's a bit more boring. But yeah,
it's funny too, because self-awareness is such a big part of this, because as you said, the intent might be to do X and they think that their actions are aligning, but
right.
Not realizing just putting a poster on the wall is not living values. It's communicating values, but it's not living them. It's two very, very different things. And that comes from the actions in which you present yourself.
Yeah, there's a company I know that has values that say, hey, we are challengers of the, we value, people who challenge and each other. But then in a meeting, if you challenge a certain executive, you get quashed, right? So the question is, which is wrong? Is the action just not reflecting that executive's intention? In the sense that the executive really means, I do want you to challenge me, but I'm not projecting properly? Or is it the other way around? The action of them creating that value never reflected their real intention. His intention was never wanted you to challenge, just wanted the yes men, yes women around them to say, you're so smart, whatever you say is right. How can I serve you?
But putting challenge on a poster looks so cool, Neal. It looks cool, whether you do it or not.
It does, but you better not put that on a poster if you're an egotistical, insecure person who can't handle being challenged. Right? And sadly, a lot of people are, right? And some of them want to change. I'm not trying to say they're bad people. It's just, that's a hard thing to get over for a lot of people. But don't do it until you're ready.
Any resources you recommend to somebody that's trying to understand a little bit more about alignment between intent and action?
That's a good question. To be honest with you, most of the, my own, work in this area is on the psychology side. And a lot of what we're talking about today are embedded in most EQ resources. I'm also a big fan of Psychology Today. I read a ton of their articles and posts because I think so much of what psychologists, psychotherapists, social workers do is actually key to leadership skills. So I would recommend digging into psychology.
Thank you so much for your time and your brain on this. I loved where the conversation kind of went. It was very much about how the organization's intent, but also the individuals as well, which they're linked. People, it's the workplace culture we're talking about.
Yeah.
So to wrap up with the last question, what is one simple action people can do right now to improve their relationships at work?
Approach everything really like a clean slate. Try to be aware of those biases you have and just be that detective. Look for clues, look for signs, ask questions. If you're not sure, get clarity. Hey, I feel like you're saying, by the way, that's a totally okay thing to say. Hey, you seem like really passionate. For me, it's landing like you're upset that I'm doing this. What are you actually feeling? I don't want to mess this up. So, even just that, if you just walked away with every time you were not sure about someone's intentions that you just ask them, you can do that, by the way. You have permission. You're not going to, people are like, oh, I can't do that. No, you can. Hey, Neal, when you just told us that it was really important that we all did this, did you mean you want me to work 60 hours a week? Because you said it was really important that we work hard. No, not at all. I'm so glad you asked me that question because work-life balance is critical. I mean that when you're here, let's keep our minds focused here. But then I want you to leave and I do want you to stop working and forget about it and go home. So ask. You can ask the question. But yeah, remember people are all humans. We're all the same. We all have the same feelings and needs. And when unsure, ask. I would say those are two actions you can take away.
Thank you very much, Neal, for your time. I really appreciate you being on the podcast. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.